In a time of huge societal change and societal issues as well, trust is intrinsically linked to other major areas of global concern, like representation and inclusion within advertising, and like sustainability and tackling climate change, and how my business is doing that. That you won't do it unless you're trusted and trustworthy.
And welcome back to The Responsible Edge, a podcast about how to win at business responsibly. I'm Charlie Martin, your host and founder of TrueMark, the mark of trusted marketing and communications. And our article this week is very much aligned with our work, entitled, "Your Company Needs a Chief Trust Officer. Here's 3 reasons why." Published by Fortune in 2026 and written by Edelman's US Head of Corporate Regulation, Jonathan Jordan, it argues that trust is now business critical, but sits unowned across communications, legal, compliance, HR, and security, and makes the case for a single C-suite executive whose sole job is managing trust as a strategic discipline. And I'm absolutely delighted to say that I've got a real expert in the room to unpack all of this today. I've got Matt Bourn, an expert in corporate communications and industry reputation. He's a director of communications at the Advertising Association and co-author of Trusted Advertising and Sustainable Advertising. Matt, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time.
Thanks, Charlie. We're looking forward to our conversation.
So, Matt, I have to say, obviously, I love the fact that trust is very much in our wheelhouse and obviously key and core to all the work that we're doing at TrueMark and the Anti-Greenwash Charter. When I read this article, I was immediately struck by this idea of a chief trust officer and thought, my goodness, what an interesting concept.
So it's really interesting when you sent me the article, because I'd already read it. So I have a daily tracker which comes through, which is tracking anything really being written on trust connected to advertising and communications. So I sort of filter all through them. And this article, when it came out in late May, it caught my attention at the time, because I thought, I really respect the work that Edelman are doing around the trust barometer, and we wrote in detail about that in the latest book. But B, I like the provocation of a chief trust officer. So my initial instinct was like, yeah, that makes complete sense. But actually, when I sort of read the article and reflected on it, while I like the idea of it, I would push back on the reality of it. And I would suggest that actually we need everybody in the C-suite to specifically take responsibility for trust in their area of the business as a collective, because it's so central to what I think is critical to business success. But I loved what Jonathan's put down. I completely agree with, the points that he's raising about Edelman's research, sort of highlighting the, people's concerns with trust and what they trust and who they trust and why they trust, because there is a huge disruption in trust taking place in the 21st century. Connected to technology, connected to societal issues, all of those kind of things. All the evidence, and really the reason why we sort of wrote the book was I genuinely believe that in order to win, and really a brand, its ambition is to win, in terms of its customers, its collection of customers, by beating other brands. I think the fundamental reason, once you've got your product or service quality right, it's whether or not the customer trusts you more than your competitors. And so it is the killer point of differentiation. And we're building more and more evidence that is actually the case.
Matt, it's a fantastic observation. And going back to your sort of original reflection upon well, yeah, the sort of slightly provocative notion of a chief trust officer. I do think we need to provide some context here that this is obviously one of Edelman's senior figures calling for a new role, which ultimately would be the aiding of Edelman significantly in terms of being able to sell their services to a chief trust officer. So I think we just need to frame this kind of opinion piece in the realms of why Jonathan might have been pitching it this way. But to your point, what you're really saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that the idea of kind of siloing the responsibility for trust into a single role just misses the point, essentially, on how to view trust, which is something that's really at a kind of a cultural leadership level and needs to be factored into and considered across the entire organization and how it operates.
Yeah, the leadership team has a collective responsibility to make sure it's the most trusted business in its sector. And that's across everything that it does. I think Jonathan makes a really good distinction. And one of the things that I think is really good about his article is he talks about the difference between reputation and trust. And trust is still a slightly fuzzy, warm kind of metric to be able to measure and understand. And when we were researching the book and speaking with many marketers, we asked them, does trust matter? Yes. Trust matters hugely. Okay, how do you measure it? How do you track it? Well, we track it through brand awareness or saliency, share of voice, favorability, likability. But there's a huge difference between being liked and being trusted. And probably the most powerful example we found within the work that we were looking at were a brand like giffgaff, which is a mobile service provider. And for a start, they talk about their customers as members of the giffgaff community. They don't use the word customer. They talk about a member. And 1 in 5 new business leads come in through their friends and family referral scheme. So 20% of their new business is built purely on the trust that their members have to recommend them to more members.
From how I interpreted the way he positioned it, that reputation is very much about the here and the now, i.e. like how do people feel about the company right now? And trust is almost that forward-looking, like how do I feel about how this company is going to behave and act in the future?
I think there is the opportunity within advertising to be more explicit about, will the outcome of this next campaign help to build people's trust in what it is that we're offering, and to make that more explicit and build that in. Trust, we went back to the sort of the origins of the word, what is it about? And it's that, it's rooted in a Germanic dru, which is about being firm and strong. And actually it's about a confidence in you. And there's an interesting synergy there with advertising, because really advertising is a promise. Advertising, is a promise to you that here's something that I offer, and I think it's great, and in a really entertaining, brilliant way, I'm going to tell you about that. And then it's up to you to, whether you take me up on that promise or not. And then behind the scenes, obviously, we need to deliver on that promise. And I think there are really interesting conversations to be had at a business board level about, well, what is it we want to be trusted for? Be really clear about it, be specific about that trust. And then how, when it comes to the CMO role and the advertising, how then do I build people's trust in what it is that we offer? And what we do in the book is we really, the simple answer is, well, don't lie. But the incredibly complex answer is it's everything, right? It's your creativity in terms of the storytelling and your use of music, or your use of humor, or your use of talent that people can connect with. It's the representation of the world that you're presenting. So it's everything in the creative. And then it's everything in the context. It's where your ad appears, because you're by association A lot of people read into whether or not they think you are trustworthy through where you appear. And there's a huge amount of research about how the biggest signal of trust isn't the message, it's the messenger that brings it to people. And which is where, there's I find it very interesting, a constant dynamic conversation about the perfect media mix, in order to build, people's trust in your brand. And then what's happened, if you like, in recent times is that has been hit hard by tech. And there's been a really dynamic disruption, which really can be encapsulated with the introduction of influencers or creators into the mix as a newer trusted channel for people to get information about a brand. And that's linked to tech. That's linked to tech, but it's the bigger picture of what's happened to trust in the 21st century. And Rachel Botsman's written a brilliant book about it, which is all about, rather than trust being top down, trust is sideways. It's peer to peer. It's people like me that I trust. All of those things are coming into play. And so it's very complicated for a brand. A brand can't just tell you to trust it in a mass broadcast way anymore. It's part of a conversation about whether or not the brand is trustworthy within a bigger picture.
One of the things I think the article also alluded to was how if organizations can start building trust into that kind of key strategic asset, it actually protects them from the inevitable mistakes that they might make as an organization that happen. And ultimately, from a reputational perspective, bring that back in, kind of building that moat, if you like, to coin that phrase.
So the best evidence base that we've seen so far is within the IPA effectiveness data bank. Right, so the IPA effectiveness data bank runs once every couple of years, and it's a very, very difficult thing to win. It's all about commercial success. And what the team at the IPA did off the back of conversations we'd had with them about the book was they looked at the data bank and looked at the winners where the advertising had either intentionally or unintentionally built trust as an outcome of the advertising campaign. So you've got about 1,000 or so case studies in there in total, and then they called out the ones that built trust. So what they found was that the trust building advertising campaigns were 41% more effective than the average IPA effectiveness winner. So if I put that into a sort of analogy for you, if an IPA effectiveness winner is a 100-meter runner that can run 100 meters in 10 seconds, right? The average one runs it in 10 seconds. Those that build trust run it in 7.41 seconds, right? They are a significantly more competitive in terms of the result. And they break that down and they say, well, what does that mean then? And what it means is it's cheaper to acquire customers. It's cheaper to retain customers. And this is the really interesting thing, is you can actually charge people more. There's a premium in being trusted. Why? Because I would argue that in a world where trust is being disrupted, if people find a brand that they trust, the promise, they know they're going to get it every single time, they'll pay a little bit more. So there are huge business reasons why focusing in on being the most trusted in your competitive set will improve your business performance.
What are the other kind of key levers, if you like, that an organization can pull when it comes to trust? Like, what are the other things that they need to be doing beyond communicating clearly, being able to back up their communications with action? Like, what else is in that mix?
Well, I think every marketer we spoke to said, it starts internally. It starts with the product or the service quality. As Andrea Vidler, who's our president, but also CEO of Allwyn that run the National Lottery, pointed out, you can't advertise a great tin of beans if somebody opens up that tin of beans and it's really poor quality beans inside it. They'll buy one tin, but they're never going to buy you a tin again. Right. So we're under no illusion that, and this is why I would sort of challenge the chief trust officer siloed notion, rather than if we're a beans company then, and we want to be trusted for the best beans, then it's everybody's responsibility within the C-suite and leadership team to make sure they are. And then my job as the marketer is to find a really compelling way of making that promise to the customer and to the, to customers that might not think about us, to test the beans.
I want to ask you about a few of the statistics in the article, and I want to get your view, Matt, on kind of what you think, getting your little magic ball out, you think the kind of the next wave, if you like, of trends in corporate trust are going to look like. I think the research suggests that 61% of people globally now hold a grievance mindset, which I thought was quite an interesting use of term, and that 70% show an insular trust mindset.
Yeah, I mean, trust is local. That's what Edelman is sort of pointing to. And, I think that some of the, and people are very much sort of, looking at their experience from what does it mean for me? What does it mean for the people that I love, my family and my friends? And what does it mean for the community, the area that I live in? Because that's the very real and what I see. Right. So if you're a global brand, that's a huge thing to be kind of wrestling with, is how to be both global, but also like hyper local and trusted at that hyper local level. But one of the sort of interesting things that we've been sort of looking at when it comes to sustainability messaging is there's a hardcore that will buy a product or service and suffer the quality difference because they believe that it needs to be done because of climate change, right? But the vast majority, might have the intention, but when they get to the till, it will be price related, or it will be, essentially ease of access to that related. The research is showing that really the best way to sell, if you like, that sustainable product, service or option is to really highlight just how it's better for you, how it's better for the people that you love, and how it's better for the area that you live in. And I think that's really interesting that's the positive response to this grievance mindset. But I think it's a challenge for businesses globally and nationally and locally to think that through. Because obviously the promise of better needs to be real, right? So I can't just make it, it's what we've been talking about, advertising is a promise, but it's no good if you don't deliver on that promise.
I want to, you brought up sustainability, so I want to ask you about this as well, because this aligns sort of more with some of the work that we're doing at the moment as well. But one of the things that we found that I really just want to get your view on, that's been really helpful in trying to kind of get, brand leads, marketing leads, comm leads to kind of lean back into sustainability communications, is that we've kind of pitched it as, well, guys, if you're not pulling the lever of sustainability comms when it comes to trust, you're missing out on one of those key levers to pull to help build and nurture trust with your stakeholders. Because if you're not communicating in that area, it's a real void, if you like, that your competitors probably will be communicating in. Is that a sensible position to hold when it comes to counteracting green hushing and encouraging more organizations to communicate in this area?
Yes, I would completely agree. The ASA has just literally late last week, early this week, published a new guide called Green Speaking with Confidence, to really help set out, if you like, the guardrails of how to make environmental claims without misleading. So I would encourage everybody to look really closely at those. I do think that we unfortunately have ended up in a world where the polemic of essentially either absolute perfection in terms of sustainable delivery, or you're the devil and you're causing all of the problems, that there's not a lot of room in the middle for progress. And I'd love to see more room and more discussion for this is better than last year. This latest edition is more sustainable than the previous one, and a conversation about the gains that are going to happen. Because when we talk about a sustainable economy, we're talking about every single sector, and we're talking about every single product or service in that. They're all going to move at different pace, and they're all going to be, if you like, competing at different levels. So we're not going to have perfection in a travel and tourism sector, overnight. Yes, there might be outliers that are showing the way, but there's going to be a mainstream, that is moving towards it. And we need to be able to have that conversation and to be able to have that conversation in a trusted way. And I feel at the moment, my observation is that the polemic has scared that conversation off, which is really ironic, because really we're all in the same boat. We're all on the same planet. We all need to learn from each other. And really the way we're going to get through this is by learning best practice in sustainability from each other year on year, decade on decade, as fast as we can.
Just one point on that, because I do think there's an interesting thing here. Progress, essentially, progress over perfection, describing that this year we've been a bit better in this area. This version of this new product is a bit better than a previous version. I think that's such a sensible way of thinking about sustainability comms. Does that therefore mean that there is no room in your mind, or what's your view on aspirational target setting? Like, is that something that, from a comms perspective, we should just row back from that collectively, because that is what lends itself to setting targets that are ultimately not fulfilled? And to the point about trust, they're not delivering on something that we promised.
I think we need to be, cautious on target setting. But I think unless we set targets and unless we commit to measuring how we're performing against them year on year, I think I think that would be a problem. So I wouldn't not set targets. I think I would just be A, cautious about them, and B, provide regular updates on them and measurement. I think from a business point of view, I think it probably is most important to the staff. I think, as we know, there's a growing sense of, people wanting to work for businesses that they know are doing the right thing and have a long-term sustainable plan. So I think the responsibility at a leadership level lies with the business and how they're reporting that back to their staff. And actually, from a trust perspective, one of the most powerful advocates of trust in your business is actually your employees. Right. So, you talk about a business like Tesco, who employs 250,000 people. And once you factor in their friends and family, you got a few million people there. So their experience and their trust in the Tesco brand has a huge reach before you even start doing external communication.
Just sort of final reflections from from a perspective of writing the latest book, Trusted Advertising. What are the things that is there anything that we've not discussed today that is an absolutely core fundamental finding that anyone out there that's thinking about their organization and thinking about, their approach to trust, is there anything that they need to hear that sort of factored into the book?
So I think we're moving from what we would describe as the attention economy, which is what I've tried to do is I've tried to get your attention at the lowest possible cost per acquisition, to the trust economy, which is essentially a battle to build trust in a brand in order to win. So if we were to talk about, what I would love to see happen is the delivery of a trust economy, essentially where the most trusted and trustworthy brands in every sector succeed. And with that comes, representation, sustainability, all of the things that we know are sort of integral to that. So what I would say to marketers listening is get trust on the plan. When you're thinking about your next advertising campaign, I think within the brief should be trust. We want to be trusted for this, right? We're really specific. We're really clear about what we want to be trusted for. That's the promise we're making. Where are customer levels in trust right now with us and that promise? And how is this advertising campaign going to increase those levels of trust in what it is, in what it is that we deliver? So I would love, and obviously within that is that conversation about it's more sustainable. It's more reflective of the modern world that we live in and we aspire to. But I would put trust on the plan and have the conversation about the trust economy and make sure your business is the most trusted.
From our perspective, if we are moving into the era of the trust economy and not the attention economy, I mean, we're all for that as well. Matt, let me conclude now. If I was to hand you a magic wand, Matt, and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
I think the thing that we haven't touched on is the importance of, within the advertising and marketing world, the ASA and the self-regulatory system. So if I was magic wanding, I think I would encourage everyone to really understand and support and invest in the strongest self-regulation the strongest and most effective self-regulation system that we could find. Not just the ASA, but that's setting the standards, because governments have so many problems to deal with that we as an industry should be capable of delivering brilliant, responsible advertising ourselves. And we will do that really through, strong, effective self-regulation. So that would be my sort of magic wand, is to really encourage everybody to think about responsibility and how we deliver that without intervention.
Matt, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time this morning and for joining me for a show.
No problem. Thank you.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big, big thank you to Matt Bourn for joining me on today's show. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by TrueMark, the mark of trusted marketing and communications. Visit truemark.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.